Page 68. The End of Magic. If you keep on climbing a mountain, you will eventually reach the top. That's the thing with mountains. However big they are, there is always a top. Even if it takes all through the day and all through another night, you will usually get there, if you keep remembering there is a top. Well, unless the mountain is in the Himalayas, in which case the mountain just keeps on going. And even though you know there is a top, you freeze to death and all your toes fall off before you get there. But this wasn't that big a mountain, and Nicholas' toes didn't fall off. He, Blitzen, and Mika carried on as green curtains of light filled the night sky. "Look, Mika, it's the northern lights." And Mika stood on his hind legs in Nicholas's pocket and stared up and saw that the vastness of the sky was filled with beautiful, mysterious, ghostly light. To be honest, Mika didn't care. Beauty is not of particular interest to a mouse, unless it's in the creamy yellowness or the blue veins of a nice piece of cheese. So, as soon as Mika peeked his head out of Nicholas's pocket, he curled back down again. "Isn't it wonderful?" said Nicholas, gazing up at the aurora, which looked to him like someone was sprinkling glowing green dust across the heavens. "Warmth is wonderful," said Mika. By sunrise, they reached the top of the mountain, and though the sky was blue and the northern lights had disappeared, they were still glowing, just lower down now in the valley beyond the mountain. And this aurora wasn't just every shade of green. It was every color in the rainbow. Nicholas looked at the map, trying to recognize any of the landscape. The elf village was supposed to be visible beyond the mountain, but there was nothing but a snow-filled plain of land leading toward the horizon. Actually, no. There was some hill in the distance, to the northwest, with tall pine trees, but there was no other sign of life. They continued to head directly north toward the multicolored lights down the mountain, trudging through the light-filled air. It was incredible how quickly Nicholas's spirits fell. On top of the mountain, everything had seemed possible. But now, trudging through thick snow, he was getting worried again. "I must be going mad," Nicholas said. His hunger was beginning to hurt, as though there was something alive, growling and moving inside his stomach. He pulled his father's head down over his ears. They walked on through the snow, which was starting to thin a little bit, still felt heavy, and through red and yellow and green and purple tinged air. Also, Nicholas could sense that something was wrong with Blitzen. He was slowing down, and his head dropped so low Nicholas couldn't see his antlers. "You need to sleep. I need to sleep," said Nicholas. "We've got to stop." But Blitzen didn't stop. He kept on, one faltering step after another, until his knees buckled and he collapsed in the snow. Thud. Nicholas was trapped under him, and Blitzen, one of the largest reindeer there had ever been, was heavy. Mika crawled out of Nicholas's pocket and scampered over the snowy ground around to Blitzen, scratching at his face to try and wake him. "Blitzen, wake up! You're on my leg!" shouted Nicholas. But Blitzen wasn't waking up. Nicholas could feel his leg getting crushed. The pain throbbed from his ankle through his entire body, until there was little else to think about, just pain. He tried pushing against Blitzen's back and wriggling his leg in the snow. If Nicholas hadn't been so weak and hungry, he might have been able to free himself. But Blitzen was getting heavier and colder all the time. "Blitzen!" yelled Nicholas. "Blitzen!" He realized he could just die here and no one would know or care. Terror filled Nicholas with a new kind of chill, as the strange light kept shifting in the air around him. Red, yellow, blue, green, purple. "Mika, go. I think I'm stuck here. Go on. Go." Mika looked around, worried, but then saw something Nicholas's human eyes couldn't see. "What is it, Mika?" Mika squeaked an answer that Nicholas couldn't understand. "Cheese," said Mika. "I smell cheese." Of course, there was no cheese to be seen, but that didn't stop Mika. If you believe in something, you don't need to see it. And so the mouse ran and kept running. The snow, though thick, was light and fluffy and evenly spread on the ground, and Mika was moving fast, churning through it, heading north. Nicholas watched his mouse friend become a dot and then disappear completely. Goodbye, my friend. Good luck. He lifted his hand to wave. His fingers were so cold they had turned a deep dark purple. It felt as if they were burning up. His stomach ached with cramp. His leg, squeezed between the weight of a reindeer and the weight of the world, was in agony. He closed his eyes and imagined a vast feast: ham, gingerbread, chocolate cake, bilberry pie. Nicholas lay back in the snow and felt an overwhelming exhaustion, as though life was leaving him too. Mika had disappeared, and then Nicholas felt so dreadful he said something equally dreadful, the very worst thing that anyone can ever say. Close your eyes and ears, especially if you are an elf. There is no magic, he whispered, delirious, and after that everything became darkness. Page 74. Father Topo and little Noosh. There were voices in the dark. Kabicha Luska, Kabicha Tiki, said one voice. It was a strange voice, small, fast, and high-pitched. A girl's voice, maybe. Tahanur, Atuna Loska as Nuoska, Noosh. The second voice was slower and deeper, but still strange. It was almost like singing. Was he dead? Well, no, not quite. But nor was he alive, and if they had found him and Blitzen even just a minute later, then they would have found two dead bodies. The first thing Nicholas noticed was the warmth. It felt like a kind of warm syrup was filling him up from the inside. He did not yet feel the small hand pressed against his heart, but he could still hear the voices, even if they did sound a million miles away. What is it, Grandpapa? Said the high-pitched voice, which now, even more weirdly, Nicholas could understand perfectly, as if it was speaking his own language. It's a boy, Noosh, said the other. A boy? But he is taller than you, Grandpapa. That's because he is a special kind of boy. A special kind? What kind? He is a human, the deeper voice said carefully. There was a gasp. A human? Will he eat us? No. Should we run away? It's perfectly safe, I'm sure, and even if it's not, we must never let fear be our guide. Look at his weird ears. Yes, human ears can take a lot of getting used to. But what happened to... Come on, little Noosh. We mustn't think of that. We must always help those who are in trouble, even if they are human. He looks terrible. Yes, he does. That is why we must do everything we can, Noosh. Is it working? Yes. A degree of worry rose up in his voice. I believe it is, and on the reindeer too. Blitzen woke and slowly rolled over, taking his weight off Nicholas. Those eyes were now blinking awake. Nicholas gasped. For a moment he didn't know where he was. Then he saw the two creatures and gasped again, because that is what you do if you see elves. The elves were both quite short, as elves tend to be, although one is taller than the other. Nicholas could see the smaller one was a girl elf. She had black hair and skin whiter than the snow and sharp cheeks and pointed ears and large eyes slightly too far apart. She was wearing a green-brown tunic that didn't look very warm, but she didn't seem to be cold. The older and bigger elf was wearing a similar colored tunic and a red belt. He had a long white mustache and white hair and a serious but kind look about him. His eyes twinkled like morning frost in sunshine. Who are you? Asked Nicholas, but really he meant what rather than who. I am little Noosh, said little Noosh. What's your name? I'm Nicholas. And I'm Father Topo, Noosh's grandpapa, said the other elf, who was looking around him to see if anyone was watching. Well, great-great-great-great-great-grandpapa, if we're being specific. We are elves. Elves. Am I dead? asked Nicholas, which was a bit of a silly question, as for the first time in weeks he could feel warmth flooding through his veins and excitement rising in his chest. No, you are not dead, said Father Topo. Despite your best efforts, you are very much alive, thanks to the goodness we found inside you. Nicholas was confused. But I don't feel cold or weak. Grandpapa worked a little magic, said little Noosh. Magic? A little dreamwig. Dreamwig? What's that? Little Noosh looked at Nicholas and then at her grandpapa and back at Nicholas again. You don't know what a dreamwig is? She said. Father Topo looked down at the little elf girl. He is from the other side of the mountain. There's not much magic where humans come from. He smiled at Nicholas and Blitzen. A dreamwig is a hope spell. You just close your eyes and wish for something to happen. And if you wish in just the right kind of way, you can make it happen. It's one of the earliest spells laid out in the first book of Hope and Wonder. That's an elf book about magic. I put my hand on you and your reindeer friend, and I wished you to be warm, and to be strong, and to be always safe. Always safe? Said Nicholas, confused as Blitzen licked his ear. That's impossible. Little Noosh gasped as Father Topo covered her ears. Elves never ever say that word. He shook his head. An impossibility is just a possibility you don't understand yet. But now you must leave Elfhelm, said Father Topo, and you must leave quickly. Elfhelm? The elf village? Asked Nicholas. But I'm not even there. Little Noosh laughed a long elf laugh, which is very long indeed. Father Topo gave her a stern look. What's so funny? Asked Nicholas, thinking that even if you had saved someone's life, it was still rather rude to laugh at them. We are standing on the street of 7 curves, giggled little Noosh. What? This isn't a street. It's the middle of nowhere. There is just snow and sort of colors. Little Noosh looked at Father Topo. Tell him, Grandpapa. Tell him. Father Topo looked around to check that no one is watching and quickly explained. This is the longest street in Elfhelm. We are in the southeastern corner of the village. The street winds westward all the way to the wooded hills beyond the fringes of the village. Wooded hills? Asked Nicholas. But I can't see anything, just colors in the air. And over there is Silver Lake and the Reindeer Field and all the shops on Reindeer Field Street, said little Noosh, jumping up and down and pointing. Lake? What lake? And there's Elfhelm's village hall, little Noosh said, pointing to nothing in particular. Nicholas didn't understand. He stood up. What are you talking about? Is he blind? Asked little Noosh. Father Topo looked at Nicholas, then little Noosh. Very quietly he said, To see something, you have to believe in it. Really believe. That's the first elf rule. You can't see something you don't believe in. Now try your hardest and see if you can see what you have been looking for. Page 80. The Elf Village. Nicholas looked around him as, slowly, the hundreds of colors floating in the air became less ghostly and more real, more intense and vivid and solid. Nicholas watched as the colors that had before been floating as free as a gas in the air formed themselves into lines and shapes, squares, triangles, rectangles, roads, buildings, a whole village appearing out of the air. The elf village. He was standing on a street full of small green cabins. There was another road, a bigger one, cutting into it. Nicholas looked down at the ground. There was still snow. That hadn't changed. He cast his eyes along the wider road, heading north in front of him. On each side of the road stood buildings, timber-framed with snow-covered roofs. Nicholas saw that one of the buildings had a giant wooden clock hanging outside it. Another had a little spinning top painted onto a sign. A toy shop, maybe. Beyond that was the lake little Noosh had told him about, like a large oval mirror, which was right next to a field full of reindeer. Blitzen had noticed this too, and was looking over with interest. To the west, before the wooded hills, was a large, round, dark tower, pointing to the sky. Directly to the north was the place that little Noosh had been pointing toward, Elfhelm Village Hall, made of dark, almost black timber. It was by far the largest building in the whole village. Not as tall as the tower, it was only 2 stories high, but wide and with around 20 windows, which glowed with light. Nicholas could hear singing, and the smell of something sweet and wonderful was wafting from the direction of the hall. Something he hadn't smelled in over a year, gingerbread. If anything, it smelled even better than it had outside the baker's shop in Christina Kaupunki. Wow, Elfhelm! My father was right. It's just how he described it. I like your hat, said little Noosh. Thanks, said Nicholas. He took the hat off and looked at it. It's my father's hat. He was on an expedition to Elfhelm. I wanted to know if he had made it. He was with 6 other men. He was called... But little Noosh was still focused on the hat. Red is my favorite color, after green, and yellow. I like every color, really, except purple. Purple makes me feel sad thoughts. That is where we live, she told him. She pointed toward the red and green cabin a small way in the distance. It's wonderful, said Nicholas, but I also wondered if you'd seen a mouse. Yes, shouted little Noosh. Father Topo quickly covered her mouth with his hand. Okay, human child, you've seen Elfhelm. Now you had better take your reindeer and go, said Father Topo. Whatever you expect to find won't be here. Blitzen nudged Nicholas's shoulder as if he understood the new urgency in Father Topo's voice, but Nicholas stayed where he was. I came to find my father, he said. I've traveled 1,000 miles. Blitzen, Mika, and I are not just going to turn around and go back. The old elf shook his head. I'm sorry. It's not wise for a human to be here. You must go back south. I'm sorry. It's for your own good. Nicholas looked into Father Topo's eyes and pleaded. My father is all I have got. I need to know if he made it to Elfhelm. He could be our pet, suggested little Noosh. Father Topo patted the elf girl on the head. I don't think humans like to be pets, little Noosh. Please, I come here peacefully. I just want to know what happened to my father. Father Topo considered. I suppose, given the season, there might be a chance you could be welcomed. This excited little Noosh. Let's take him to the hall. I won't cause any trouble, I promise, said Nicholas. Father Topo gave a quick glance over to the tall circular tower in the west. Trouble doesn't always have to be caused. It's sometimes already there. Nicholas had no idea what this meant, but he followed the elves as they walked in their clogs toward the wooden hall. They head down that broad shopping street with the sign that declared simply the main path. Passing the clock shop, a bakery with smoke-stained windows, and a toy and sleigh shop with the poster advertising lessons at the School of Sleigh Craft. They also passed a crooked black-tiled building with windows made of ice, the Daily Snow. Read the sign outside. The main elf newspaper, explained Father Topo, full of fear and nonsense. There were 3 copies of the newspaper piled high outside. Little Kip still missing was the headline, and Nicholas wondered who Little Kip was. He was about to ask, but though they were small, the elves were fast walkers, and they were already some way ahead. He and Blitzen were struggling to keep up. What's that building? He asked. The tall tower? Look, said Father Topo, changing the subject. That's the North Pole. He pointed at a thin green rod sticking out of the ground. Little Noosh spoke up. Do you think Father Vodol will be kind? I think it'll be all right, said the old elf. Come on, little Noosh. We elves are kind and welcoming in our hearts. Well, we always used to be before you were born. Even Father Vodol knows that. Nicholas was confused. Father Tipo? Topo, the old elf corrected him. Father Topo, sorry. I just wanted to ask if... Here you are, Blitzen, exclaimed little Noosh. They had reached the clear, icy lake. Just beyond it lay an open field, where 7 other reindeer were happily chewing lichen from the trees. Do you know if my Father Topo ignored him and called out to the reindeer, "Oh, dearlings, come here. Here's a new friend." Meanwhile, little Noosh was back to talking about her favorite colors. "I quite like indigo. It's much nicer than purple, and crimson, and turquoise, and magenta." Blitzen stood behind Nicholas and nuzzled his shoulder. "He's a bit antisocial," Nicholas explained to Father Topo. But one of the reindeer, a female, came over and gave Blitzen the gift of some grass. For a moment, Nicholas thought he saw her feet actually leave the ground, a gap between where the reindeer's body ended and where her shadow began. But maybe he had just imagined that. "Ah, that's Donor," said little Noosh, "the kindest of all." Little Noosh started pointing at all the other reindeer. "And there's Comet with the white streak on his back. And Prancer, he's so funny, skipping with Cupid. Cupid will lick your head off if you let him. Oh, and the dark one, that's old Vixen. She's a bit of a grumpy thing. And that one is Dancer, and Dasher, who is the fastest of the lot." "Are you okay, boy?" Nicholas asked Blitzen. But Blitzen was already off making friends. Nicholas noticed that the wound of Blitzen's leg had totally healed. Once Blitzen was grazing contentedly, they walked on, past the sign pointing west to the wooded hills, where the pixies live. The music got louder, the scent of gingerbread stronger, and the sense of fear mixed with the strange excitement until they had reached the door of the old village hall. "Oh, and you do know what day it is, don't you?" said the Father Topo, with a nervous smile. "No, I don't even know the month." "It's the 23rd of December, 2 days till Christmas. This is our Christmas party, the only party we're allowed now. But it's not as good as it used to be, because dancing has been banned." Nicholas couldn't believe he had been away that long, but there were even harder things to believe, as he was about to find out.